The story we are analyzing today begins with a simple, desperate call for help. It's a story of profound systemic failure and instantaneous tragedy.
It is.
Our focus is the death of Sonya Massey, a 36-year-old unarmed woman killed by a responding deputy in her own home in Woodside Township, Illinois.
We have been provided with a stack of source material, investigative reports, court documents, news accounts, and testimony, and our mission here is to really synthesize these facts for you.
Right. To understand the minute-by-minute escalation that led to this, the historical context, and the remarkable legal and legislative fallout that followed.
And it is crucial that we approach this with clarity and solemnity. Sonya Massey's death on July 6, 2024, at the hands of Sangamon County Sheriff's Deputy Sean Grayson, it really represents a worst-case scenario.
When a citizen relies on law enforcement for protection.
Exactly. The fact that she initiated the contact believing her safety was threatened by a prowler just underscores the devastating irony of the outcome. We offer our deepest sympathy to Mrs. Massey's family for their immense loss.
We're going to use your sources to move through this narrative logically. First, we'll analyze the critical moments of the incident itself, focusing on the bizarre and, frankly, rapid escalation that occurred after Mrs. Massey opened her door.
Then the focus has to shift to the officer involved, Sean Grayson.
Because his history of misconduct across multiple departments is not just a footnote.
No, it's not. It is the central institutional failure of this entire case.
And finally, we'll examine the resulting public accountability, from the criminal trial that led to a conviction, to the civil settlement, and the new law now known as Sonya Massey's bill.
This is all about identifying the specific points of failure, procedural, institutional, and individual, that culminated in this avoidable death, and then tracking how those failures forced a larger conversation about policing in America.
So let's start precisely where the source material dictates, with the initial 911 call. It was placed by Sonya Massey in the early hours of July 6, 2024.
At 1:20 a.m. Central Daylight Time, she was alone in her home and reported that she believed a prowler had broken in.
So that is the initial reality. A woman in fear, in her own home, calling for help.
That foundational context cannot be overstated. I mean, you have to remember, she wasn't stopped on the street. She wasn't engaged in any criminal activity. She was a victim seeking intervention.
And two Sangamon County Sheriff's deputies responded, Sean Grayson and Dawson Farley.
Correct. And as is routine, their first step upon arrival was a perimeter check.
So what did that preliminary search tell them?
According to all the subsequent reports and the body camera evidence, the deputies searched the backyard and the immediate vicinity of the property very thoroughly.
And they found?
Absolutely nothing. No evidence of suspicious activity, no forced entry, no prowler. After concluding this, they approached the front door.
So at this point, Ms. Massey engaged them. She opened the door. The deputies told her the area seemed clear.
And according to the sources, she was still on her cell phone during this initial exchange.
The situation should have de-escalated and just concluded right there. But it didn't.
It did not. The sources indicate that after about 3 minutes at the front door, the interaction shifted. And the three of them, Mrs. Massey, Grayson, and Farley, ended up moving inside the residence.
And that transition from an external investigation to an internal interaction, that seems to be the first major pivot point.
It is. It's the beginning of the pivot away from a routine call for service.
But wait, if they had found no evidence of a crime, why did Deputy Grayson then shift the focus to getting her identification? The sources are very specific about this change.
That is one of the first truly baffling elements of the timeline. The purpose of their presence addressing a prowler had been negated by their own search.
Right.
Yet once inside, Grayson initiated what appeared to be an investigative detour, insisting on getting her ID. There was also a detail about a vehicle parked in the driveway that she told them wasn't hers, which Grayson also seemed focused on.
So it suggests an almost immediate attempt to assert control or find another reason for the interaction, even though she was the one who called them.
It does. And Mrs. Massey, according to the body camera footage reviewed in the sources, she was actively trying to comply.
She was searching for her ID.
She was. The sources detail that she spent about 90 seconds actively searching through papers and her purse for her identification. That is a substantial period of compliance, especially under duress.
It completely contradicts any narrative of immediate aggressive resistance on her part.
And there is a truly poignant detail embedded in this phase of the search, which, in hindsight, just adds another layer of sorrow to what happened.
The Bible.
Yes. While she was searching, Mrs. Massey asked Deputy Grayson to hand her a Bible. It's a moment that, it speaks to her mental state, maybe seeking comfort or some kind of stability during this unexpected and seemingly unnecessary encounter in her own kitchen.
And this request precedes the next catastrophic pivot point by just moments.
So we have a search for ID, a deputy insisting on documentation, and then the critical pivot occurs. And it's not over a weapon, it's not over a threat, it's over something completely mundane.
A pot of boiling water.
This is where the narrative becomes almost surreal. The deputies noticed a pot of water boiling on the stove. This observation led them to ask her to check on it.
One of the deputies explicitly stated, "We don't need a fire while we're here."
A request, aimed at preventing a small kitchen hazard, but it immediately became the focus of the entire interaction.
And Miss Massey responded to that request. She picked up the pot of water and moved it from the stove toward the sink just to get it off the heat.
But as soon as she did that, the deputies reacted.
Violently.
Well, they reacted physically. As she moved the pot, both Deputy Farley and Deputy Grayson physically moved backward. Mrs. Massey immediately picked up on this reaction. She was confused, perhaps concerned, and she asked them why they moved.
And Grayson's reply.
Grayson replied that he was distancing himself from the boiling water, which on its own is maybe a reasonable move, but it also just amplified the sudden tension in the room.
She then repeated her question, trying to understand why they were creating this distance. And it was her next verbal statement that seemed to just flip a switch in Grayson.
That is correct. After repeating her question, she made a spiritual declaration that appeared to have a profoundly aggressive effect on Grayson. She stated twice, "I rebuke you in the name of Jesus."
And this is the point, according to all analysis of the footage, where the situation instantly and irreversibly transitioned from a routine interaction into a perceived threat situation, at least in Deputy Grayson's mind.
The sources are chillingly precise about what happened immediately following Mrs. Massey's religious statement.
Deputy Grayson's reaction was instantaneous, and it was completely disproportionate to any threat posed by a statement of faith.
Following that second utterance, Grayson drew his service pistol. The words he used, which are documented verbatim in the source material, reflect an explosive and unprofessional rage.
He issued an extremely strong, profane threat.
Yes, including the words, "You better not, I swear to God, I'll shoot you right in your face," and he screamed, "Drop the pot."
The subtle severity of that threat, juxtaposed against a woman holding a pot of water, is just shocking.
And Deputy Farley, Grayson's partner, he also drew his gun at this time, which indicates he, too, recognized the situation had become instantly adversarial.
But what is so critical to note is Mrs. Massey's reaction to this immediate threat of deadly force.
She didn't escalate.
No, she apologized immediately. She said, "Okay, I'm sorry."
Right. And then she attempted to retreat and comply by dropping to the floor behind the kitchen counter. She raised her hands in surrender, though she did briefly rise again while still shielded by the counter.
This rapid de-escalation by the victim stands in stark contrast to the sustained aggression by the officer.
And despite her apology, despite her attempt to retreat and take cover, both deputies advanced on her position.
That is the tragic reality captured on the body camera footage.
Both officers advanced from the living room toward the kitchen, weapons trained on her, continuing to shout orders for her to drop the pot. This lasted for several seconds.
Then, Deputy Grayson fired 3 shots.
Mrs. Massey was struck fatally by 1 shot to the head or face. The sources confirm this immediately ended the encounter.
There's an additional highly specific detail reported by CBS News regarding the moment of impact.
Yes, that specific news report, having reviewed the footage, noted that Massey may have been holding the pot of water above her head just before the shots were fired.
Which, if accurate, could have been interpreted by an officer as preparing to throw the water.
It could have, but it also proves she had not yet dropped the pot, which was the core demand of the officers in that moment. However, the prosecution later successfully argued that any perceived threat was manufactured by Grayson's own earlier threats and his aggressive posture.
The second, and perhaps most damning element of the sources detailing the incident, covers what happened immediately after the shooting, specifically the failure to render aid.
This goes directly to the state of mind of Deputy Grayson.
It does.
Immediately after the shots were fired, Deputy Farley radioed that shots had been fired and reported a woman with a headshot wound. Farley, recognizing his training obligation, started to leave the scene to retrieve his medical kit. He intended to render aid.
But Grayson actively, verbally stopped him.
Exactly. The source material quotes Grayson telling Farley, "She's done. You can go get it, but that's a headshot."
She's done.
That phrase reveals an immediate, cold determination that life support was futile, even though emergency medical personnel hadn't even assessed the victim. This is a profound violation of duty. All officers are trained to render aid until medical professionals take over.
Farley did attempt some measure of comfort. He held dish towels to the wound.
He did. But when Grayson eventually did return with his own medical kit, his actions were horrifyingly dismissive.
When Grayson saw the extent of the injury and the efforts already underway, the sources report him saying, "I'm not even going to waste my med stuff then."
And then he threw his entire medical kit onto the floor.
This detail provides an almost complete picture of profound negligence and just a total disregard for the victim's life in the moments immediately following the use of deadly force. Sonya Massey was transported to St. John's Hospital in Springfield, where she was later pronounced dead. This entire sequence, from the knock on the door to the fatal shots and the disregard for aid, was all captured on body camera.
And that footage was eventually released publicly on July 22, 2024. The release of that footage is what really catalyzed the public outrage that followed.
To understand how a tragedy like this could unfold from a simple 911 call, we have to look beyond the incident itself. We need to examine the histories of the people involved.
Starting, of course, with the victim, Sonya Wilbur Massey.
Miss Massey was 36 years old, born in February 1988. She was a mother to a son and a daughter, a private citizen in her own home, seeking protection.
And her life was violently ended in a situation she herself initiated for her safety.
Now we turn our focus to Sean Patrick Grayson. Born in November 1993, he was 30 years old. His professional history is not one of steady service, it's one of rapid turnover.
And that is central to the institutional failure we need to unpack.
Your sources make it clear he was what critics call a wandering officer. His record shows he worked for 6 different Illinois police departments in just 4 years.
Between 2020 and 2024, that pace of movement alone signals administrative turmoil.
That rapid professional migration is often a telltale sign of an officer leaving trouble behind, looking for a clean slate somewhere else.
And this pattern began long before his police career. Grayson's history includes military service. He enlisted in the U.S. Army as a wheeled vehicle mechanic,
Serving from May 2014 to February 2016 at Fort Riley.
and his military service ended abruptly due to serious misconduct.
He was discharged specifically for serious misconduct in February 2016.
This followed 2 separate misdemeanor DUI convictions, one in 2015 and the second in 2016. The sources really emphasize that a misconduct-based discharge, particularly involving alcohol-related offenses, should have been an immediate and disqualifying red flag for any law enforcement agency considering him.
It raises serious questions about the initial vetting processes of the 6 departments that hired him after that.
And once he entered policing, the pattern of disregard for procedure and law continued immediately.
Let's talk about the 2021 incident in Kincaid, Illinois.
In 2021, while working in Kincaid, Grayson falsely arrested a man named Kyle Atkins. The source documentation states he manufactured the entire justification. He claimed there was a non-existent warrant and falsely asserted he'd found non-existent evidence.
So just a year into his policing career, it already points to a deliberate pattern of dishonest and unlawful behavior.
But the incident that most clearly illustrates his willingness to ignore direct orders and endanger the public came in 2022. He was a Logan County Sheriff's deputy at the time.
High-speed chase.
This is a textbook example of the institutional failures that define the wandering officer crisis. Grayson initiated a high-speed chase and, despite getting explicit, direct orders from his superiors to terminate the pursuit.
Presumably because the risk outweighed the need.
Exactly. He ignored them completely. The chase escalated rapidly.
How fast did he go, and what safety protocols did he violate?
The sources confirm he reached speeds up to 110 miles per hour. Critically, he then turned off his patrol vehicle's lights and siren, which is a gross violation of procedure,
Increasing the danger of the pursuit without giving any warning to other drivers.
The pursuit only ended when he physically collided with a deer.
Hitting a deer at 110 miles per hour after ignoring direct orders and turning off your lights. That's a textbook example of reckless behavior. What was the institutional response from the Logan County Sheriff's Office?
The response was the very definition of the administrative negligence that enables this wandering officer phenomenon. The sources indicate that the incident resulted in a meeting, with the possibility of firing him looming large.
But they didn't fire him.
No. The Logan County Sheriff's Office ultimately chose to absolve him.
What does absolve mean in this context? for his career.
It means they essentially swept the incident under the rug. They didn't document the formal misconduct, or they didn't report the serious violation to the state certification board.
So when he applied for his next job,
His employment record with Logan County would have appeared clean, or at least clean enough to pass muster with the Sangamon County Sheriff's Office, which then hired him. This institutional failure directly contributed to Sonya Massey's death.
had Logan County properly documented the case, Sangamon County would have faced severe scrutiny for hiring an officer with such a clear history of ignoring orders and driving recklessly.
During the subsequent legal proceedings, Grayson's attorney introduced a specific health detail into the conversation.
Right, his cancer diagnosis.
Yes. His attorney mentioned that Grayson had been diagnosed with stage 3 colon cancer in the fall of 2023. This detail was used as part of the argument for his client's release on bond.
Coupled with the fact that he turned himself in promptly after the arrest warrant was issued.
The defense essentially argued that his medical condition and his cooperation warranted his release.
But the courts did not agree.
No. Grayson has remained in custody. The Supreme Court of Illinois denied his petition for release on bond in January 2025, signaling that the severity of the alleged crime outweighed both his cooperation and his medical concerns.
Finally, let's discuss Deputy Dawson Farley, Grayson's partner at the scene. He was placed on an administrative leave initially, but his role evolved significantly.
Deputy Farley's testimony was, in many ways, the linchpin of the prosecution's case. He provided very clear evidence against his own former partner.
He directly countered Grayson's claim of self-defense.
He did, by stating unambiguously, "She never did anything that made me think she was a threat." He went on to testify that it was, in fact, Grayson's actions, the drawing of the weapon, the aggressive language, that initially raised his own sense of awareness and created the dangerous situation.
That internal police testimony must have been crucial in confirming that the use of deadly force was unjustified.
Absolutely.
The incident was so clearly documented and egregious that the response from institutional bodies was remarkably swift.
The accountability clock started immediately. The Sangamon County Sheriff's Office initiated an investigation, but it was quickly transferred to the Illinois State Police to ensure impartiality.
And that investigation was completed in just 10 days.
Astonishingly quick. And the employment action against Grayson was also rapid. He was fired by the Sheriff's Office within 2 weeks of the shooting. This immediate termination signaled that, at least in the department's view, the incident was indefensible.
Criminal charges followed almost immediately after that. On July 17, 2024, a grand jury indicted Grayson on 5 counts,
including 3 counts of first-degree murder.
It's worth noting that prosecutors initially included lesser charges, like aggravated battery and official misconduct.
But they strategically dropped those before opening arguments. This move concentrated the jury's focus entirely on the murder charges. The official conclusion from the Sangamon County State's attorney was definitive. The evidence did not support a finding that Grayson was justified in his use of deadly force.
The legal theory prosecutors used to dismantle Grayson's self-defense claim is key here. They argued that he manufactured the threat.
That is the crucial interpretive angle. The prosecutors argued that Grayson's behavior, drawing the gun, issuing the threat, advancing on her, was not a defensive reaction to an existing threat.
It was the unnecessary creation of a dangerous, high-stress scenario.
Exactly. They argued that an officer cannot aggressively escalate a routine encounter to the point of imminent violence and then claim self-defense when the person reacts fearfully or defensively. By escalating over the boiling water, Grayson essentially voided any claim that his use of force was lawful.
The criminal trial began on October 22, 2025 in Peoria County. Grayson maintained his plea of self-defense throughout.
The jury delivered its verdict on October 29, 2025. He was found guilty, but notably, he was convicted of the lesser offense of second-degree murder, not first-degree.
What does that distinction imply about what the jury was thinking?
Well, first-degree murder typically implies premeditation. Second-degree, in this context, usually means the jury determined that Grayson had acted recklessly, but that he did so under a belief, however unreasonable, that the circumstances justified the force.
So they recognized his criminal culpability, but perhaps believed he acted in the heat of the moment or under a mistaken belief of threat rather than with clear premeditation.
That's a reasonable interpretation. It's a nuanced verdict that still holds him accountable for the death, but mitigates the state of mind required for the highest murder charge.
Beyond the criminal justice system, the institutional fallout forced immediate changes within the Sangamon County Sheriff's Office itself.
The most immediate sign of that was the retirement of County Sheriff Jack Campbell on August 31, 2024. He explicitly cited the shooting as the reason.
His replacement was Paula Crouch, the first female Sangamon County sheriff.
A significant change in leadership following the crisis. And the incident also triggered federal scrutiny,
The Department of Justice launched an investigation.
specifically into discrimination in policing practices at the Sangamon Sheriff's Office. This suggests the issues were viewed as potentially systemic, not just one bad apple. As a direct consequence, the sheriff's office was compelled to agree to provide biannual reports of all citizen complaints to the DOJ.
A measure designed to enforce greater transparency.
And while the criminal trial was ongoing, Miss Massey's family sought civil accountability, represented by the civil rights attorney Ben Crump.
The civil process moved much faster. In February 2025, the family reached a substantial settlement with Sangamon County for $10 million.
This settlement represents the financial recognition by the county government of its liability for failing to properly train, supervise, and vet Deputy Grayson.
Perhaps the longest-lasting result of this tragedy came in the form of state legislation, a law aimed directly at fixing the systemic failure that allowed Grayson to be hired in the first place.
That is the critical legislative response. In May 2025, the Illinois House passed House Bill 1953, which is now officially known as Sonya Massey's bill.
And this law directly targets the wandering officer problem we discussed earlier.
It does. It mandates far more thorough and stringent background checks for police officer candidates. The goal is to close the loopholes that allow agencies, like the Logan County Sheriff's Office, to absolve officers of serious misconduct without reporting it.
So it's a direct policy-level response to the fact that an officer who shouldn't have been carrying a badge was on duty that night.
The tragedy of Sonya Massey's death took place not in a historical vacuum, but in a location with deep and painful racial history: Springfield, Illinois.
The family themselves were acutely aware of this context. They pointed to a direct and chilling connection involving one of Mrs. Massey's ancestors, William Donegan.
William Donegan was lynched during the devastating Springfield race riot of 1908. This was a moment in history where racial tensions exploded into violence.
And what adds a powerful, painful resonance to Mrs. Massey's case is the fact that her ancestor, William Donegan, was pronounced dead at the very same hospital.
St. John's Hospital, the same hospital where Sonya Massey was later pronounced dead in 2024.
That 1908 riot was a major catalyst in U.S. history. It led to the founding of the NAACP.
The historical parallel is profound, and the family articulated it clearly. One relative was quoted stating, with immense sadness, "The more things change, the more they stay the same."
It casts Miss Massey's death not as an isolated failure, but as part of a recurring, cyclical pattern of violence against Black citizens in that region.
And the initial police narrative following the shooting only intensified the public and familial anger, suggesting an attempt to obscure the truth.
Mrs. Massey's family was vocal in criticizing the sheriff's office, not just for hiring Grayson, but also for what they saw as an attempted cover-up.
Reports indicated that police initially tried to blame Mrs. Massey's death on suicide and even suggested a neighbor might have been involved. One source noted that the officer's initial dispatch to colleagues described the shooting as self-inflicted.
These conflicting and inaccurate reports, before the body camera footage was released, just fueled widespread distrust.
The source material indicates that the case immediately drew high-level political condemnation, reflecting the national gravity of the incident.
President Joe Biden released a statement arguing that Americans should be able to call for help without fearing for our lives, and making it clear that Mrs. Massey should be alive today.
Vice President Kamala Harris also weighed in forcefully. She connected the case directly to broader legislative efforts, calling on Congress to pass the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act.
She was specific in her language, noting that Mrs. Massey was tragically killed in her own home at the hands of a responding officer.
Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker also condemned the killing and directly called for Sheriff Campbell to resign, which he did shortly thereafter. Senator Dick Durbin also expressed his thoughts for the family while commending the timely investigation.
The speed and bipartisan nature of this political condemnation really underscored the perceived lack of justification for the shooting.
And the public response was widespread. It moved quickly beyond Central Illinois to become a national issue.
Protests were held in various major U.S. cities: New York City, Hartford, Atlanta.
The narrative resonated immediately because it touched on that universal fear of police violence in routine settings. The NAACP released a strong statement, placing blame directly on politicians for empowering officers like Grayson by allowing systemic failures to persist.
Commentary across various media focused on the systemic vulnerability that this case exposed.
The commentator Michael Arsenault stated that the killing was sadly not surprising, asking a rhetorical and painful question. When don't we hear of a white officer shooting a black person?
Likewise, the publication The 19th referred to the case as a striking example of how police encounters for black people, even those who call the police for help, quickly erupt into violence.
The incident just underscored the pervasive sense of insecurity felt by many when interacting with law enforcement, even when they initiate that interaction for their own safety.
In the immediate aftermath, the city of Springfield announced an increased police presence to maintain order during the civil unrest.
This case really serves as a complete narrative loop, from a private emergency to a violent public tragedy, followed by criminal conviction, institutional house cleaning, significant civil compensation, and lasting legislative reform.
We have now moved through the entirety of the source material you provided. We reviewed the rapid and tragic escalation in Mrs. Massey's home, the inexcusable lack of aid, the extensive history of misconduct that defines Sean Grayson's career, the conviction, the settlement, and the institutional changes like the DOJ oversight and Sonya Massey's bill.
As we conclude this analysis, we offer you this final thought to consider that builds on the evidence of departmental failure. We've seen that procedural legislation like Sonya Massey's bill is a necessary response, but we have to reflect on whether legislative action alone is truly sufficient to address the problem of the wandering officer.
Or if the core issue lies deeper.
Deeper, in the political and institutional willingness of local departments to utilize that information, to enforce transparency, and to resist the urge to protect officers with documented serious misconduct rather than the communities they serve.
Thanks for listening.